1. Can a chipped Buddha statue be worshipped?
Question: Venerable Master, my family worships a Buddha statue of Master Shakyamuni. I requested this Buddha statue from the temple, but the statue has a chipped arm. I don't know if it's okay to worship the chipped statue? And is it a sin? Please give me a clear answer.
Answer: Of course, there's nothing wrong with it. However, if a Buddha statue is chipped anywhere on his image, when looking at it, it will give people a bad impression and lose its solemn aesthetic appearance. Like the body of a healthy person, when people look at it, it will be easier to see than that of a person with a disability. If a Buddha statue has many broken arms, but Buddhists let it worship, then I think it will not be very dignified and beautiful. And so, I really feel sorry for them. Although the form of worship is external, it represents our inner reverence. If we don't worship, that's fine. If we do, we should invite a statue of Buddha or Bodhisattva to worship with good light and appearance. As Buddhists know, the Buddhist scriptures often describe the Buddha's body as having 32 good features and 80 beauties. Therefore, there should be verses praising the Buddha's wonderful body. As in the article, Buddha's body is as pure as glass, Buddha's face is like full moonlight, Buddha in this world often saves suffering, the Buddha's mind is non-compassionate, mean, the Buddha's body is pure and bright like lapis lazuli. Buddha's face is round and full like the bright moon and his body appears in the world to always save suffering. As for the Buddha's mind, it is always compassionate, often thinking of compassion and saving sentient beings, without any place or limit. That is the meaning of the verse. The poem both praises the Buddha's body and also praises the Buddha's boundless compassion. Through that, we see the Buddha's body with a beautiful, radiant appearance, and everyone who sees it is filled with joy, admiration, and admiration. Therefore, artists or sculptors who specialize in sculpting and creating Buddha statues often have to focus their thoughts on meditation and maintain pure precepts, using all their energy to sculpt, carve or paint. Build statues of Buddha and Bodhisattva to have a beautiful and dignified appearance. Thanks to that, everyone who sees their images feels joy, respect, admiration and worship. In the case of Buddhists, even though the Buddhists have a good heart, they invite the Buddha statue to their home to worship, but because the Buddha statue has one arm chipped, sorry, I don't know how much it is chipped, because the Buddhists did not specify it. So more or less, it loses its good and dignified appearance. Therefore, Buddhists are always anxious and worried, wondering if they should worship like that. And worshipping like that, is there any sin? I would like to clarify, so that Buddhists can feel secure and not have to worry. Actually, there is nothing wrong with Buddhists. Because worshipping Buddha is a very good thing. As Buddhists, we all want to worship Buddha or Bodhisattva statues in our homes, so that when we worship and chant, we have a place to wholeheartedly focus on. Even though it is a Buddha statue, we must wholeheartedly respect him as if he were still alive. Because the Buddha's teaching grace is vast and boundless. Thanks to that, today we know the way to practice and escape suffering, because we remember the Buddha's great and profound gratitude, we sincerely worship him. However, as mentioned, the Buddha's appearance is always solemn and beautiful, even though it is just an image. So, if we want Buddhists' hearts to be peaceful and happy and no longer have to worry or fear, I sincerely advise Buddhists to find a way to correct it. Depending on the degree of damage, Buddhists can repair it accordingly. If you can't do it yourself, you should ask someone who is skillful to fix it for you. If after editing it you still find it unsatisfactory, then I suggest that Buddhists invite another Buddha statue to worship. If you cannot invite a bone Buddha statue, you can also invite a paper Buddha statue to worship. In case the paper Buddha statue has become discolored for too long, we should replace it with a new one. Thus, Buddhists have nothing to worry or feel guilty about. And so, every time they chant and contemplate, the Buddhists' hearts feel more peaceful and joyful. At the same time, Buddhists will also receive more blessings. We wish Buddhists good health, diligent practice, and quickly achieve their wishes. 2. Can you bow to the table of death after receiving the 8 precepts?
Question: Can a Buddhist who is receiving the 8 precepts during the day bow to the altar of death?
Answer: Buddhists who come to the temple to receive the 8 precepts, that is, to receive the precepts, to practice the noble conduct of a monk, even for just one day or night, are not allowed to bow to the altars of the dead in the temple. Except for the altars of monks. Why not bow? Does that mean that a Buddhist who has received the 8 precepts has developed a high-minded, conceited and contemptuous mind? Yes, it's not like that. Don't be quick to misunderstand. A person who practices and still has a mind of conceit and contempt for others is a person who has not truly practiced. Because of the disease of clinging to ego and clinging to the Dharma, that is a taboo in Buddhism. Buddhism advocates destroying the ego, but never promoting the ego. A person who practices and still has a strong attachment to ego means that person has practiced the wrong way as taught by the Buddha and needs to correct and change his mind. We should remember that, Buddha said, the merit of a person who observes the 8 precepts for one day and night is extremely great and not small. Because during a day and night, they keep the precepts very strictly. They are truly practicing the noble practice of renunciation. Meanwhile, those other spirits are those who have only received the 5 precepts, or sometimes have not received any precepts at all. We see many people, although they also follow Buddhism. But when they are alive, they do not take refuge or receive precepts. When they die, their families, out of pity for them, bring their bones or images into their homes. Temple to worship. So, how can they let someone who is cultivating in the world bow to them? Because if they do, they will suffer great harm. It is because they are afraid of losing their blessings that they do not bow, not because monastic practitioners look down on them and do not bow. It is based on Buddhist precepts that there is such respect. In short, Buddhists who come to the temple to receive the 8 precepts, when making offerings to the deceased, should not bow to the altar of the deceased. We should only sincerely chant and pray for the souls to be released soon. If everyone brings their merit and virtue to practice the 8 precepts, and together sincerely prays for those spirits, of course they will, thanks to the merit and prayers of the monks like this quickly attain enlightenment. Birth and transformation. This work is very consistent with morality, and is also very good for the soul. 3. Does practicing alone at home make progress?
Question: I often pray the Buddha's name, but when I encounter something, my mind is agitated, sad, and unhappy. I also don't dare to go to crowded places. I only practice at home alone. Can I ask if practicing like that makes progress?
Answer: Through the questions of Buddhists, there are 3 small issues that Buddhists wonder about. 1. Buddhists often chant the Buddha's name, but when encountering problems, the Buddhist mind is still agitated, sad and unhappy. 2. Buddhists do not dare to go to crowded places. 3. Does practicing alone at home make progress? Through the 3 questions above, we would also like to answer them in turn and contribute some opinions through each issue as follows. The first problem is that Buddhists pray the Buddha's name, which is a very good thing. I wholeheartedly praise and rejoice in this work of Buddhists. However, as Buddhists say, while reciting the Buddha's name, when encountering problems, the mind is still passive, sad and unhappy. This is not unique to Buddhists, but this is a common mental illness of everyone. Because, even though we practice, our disturbing habits and karma are still full and heavy, so when faced with contact conditions, especially adversity, afflictions can easily arise. Depending on the strength of each person's cultivation, the intensity of sentient beings will vary. If a person has good inner strength, then the afflictions, greed, anger, ignorance, arrogance, doubt, evil views, joy, anger, love, fear, sadness, hate, desire, etc., will manifest. Lighter and more subtle. That means not being cruel and cruel, causing harm to people and things. On the contrary, if a person is clumsy in cultivating, all kinds of afflictions arise very violently and severely. Affliction, according to the division of consciousness onlyists, has many things. But in general there are no more than 2 things, basic afflictions and dependent afflictions. As for the basic afflictions, there are 6 types: greed, anger, ignorance, arrogance, doubt, and evil views. These things have very deep roots and are very difficult to eradicate. As for afflictions, although they are lighter, they are not easy to eliminate. Sadness and not happiness belong to afflictions. Talking about random things is because of the afflictions, including 20 things: anger, hatred, wealth, anger, illness, anger, anxiety, anger, harm, pride, shamelessness, fearlessness, restlessness, drowsiness, disbelief, lazy, distracted, absent-minded, heedless, unrighteous. They arise based on basic afflictions. Just like the branches and leaves of a tree come from the roots of the trunk, these afflictions always stir up our minds and never let us rest. It doesn't have to wait until something happens, as Buddhists say, that it arises. Sometimes while sitting awake meditating or reciting Buddha's name, it still arises regularly. If you are a person who earnestly meditates on the Buddha's name, it will be difficult for disturbing thoughts to arise. If they exist, they will be few and very weak. It is important that we regularly maintain mindfulness. When we are mindful, it is easy to recognize them when they arise. Therefore, Buddha taught us practitioners to always be awake. If we are constantly awake, the afflictions cannot do anything to us. It's their job to arise, it's our job to wisely identify and transform them. If so, then we do not have to worry about afflictions arising, but only fear that we will be slow to awaken and not be able to recognize them in time. If we clearly recognize their true face, they will disappear immediately, because their nature is false and unreal. Therefore, they cannot do anything to us. On the contrary, if we follow them and become their slaves, then we will speak and act, creating bad karma. Once you have created evil karma, it is difficult to avoid falling and suffering. Reciting the Buddha's name is also a method of treating delusions and afflictions. Thanks to constantly reciting Buddha's name, afflictions will gradually fade away, until they are no longer there, which means the practitioner has achieved one-pointedness and undisturbed mind. That is the ultimate goal of the Buddhist recitation method, which is said in the Amitabha Sutra. So Buddhists try to recite Buddha's name deeply and deeply, then afflictions will no longer have the opportunity to disturb and cause suffering to Buddhists. That way, Buddhists will have peace and happiness right now and in the future, too. The second problem is that Buddhists do not dare to go to crowded places. I very much agree with Buddhists on this. It's not because we're afraid of people that we don't come. While we are practicing, we need to avoid external conditions, which is a very good thing. In the past, the venerable Zen monks in Zen subjects have also done and advised us like that. Because if we avoid crowded, troublesome and complicated places, our minds will be able to concentrate more easily on meditation, or reciting the Buddha's name will be relatively quieter. Because we have not yet achieved, depending on the state of mind, the Buddha's land is pure. If our mind is already pure, then what scene is not pure for us? If this is not the case, then the Buddha advised us to avoid reducing our predestined conditions in order to focus on reciting the Buddha's name, because our minds are like monkeys, apes, and horses that are very easy to jump and roam freely according to the world. People who know how to practice, the more they avoid predestined situations, the better it is for themselves. Because from ancient times until now, mind and scene have never been apart. Because we are not separate from each other, whenever the scene is disturbed, our mind is also confused, chaotic and not at peace. Therefore, a true practitioner is someone who always looks closely and reflects on himself to overcome delusions and afflictions. When our mind is quite mature, we can practice and recite Buddha's name everywhere. If in a lonely scene, our mind is still busy, noisy, and chaotic, then it is no different than we are in a noisy and troublesome scene. On the contrary, if in a chaotic and complicated scene, our mind remains calm, then there is no obstacle. But this must be done by a superior, exceptional person. For ordinary people like us who are just starting to practice, dealing with situations without mind is not easy to do. Please do not rush to imitate them and bring harm to yourself. On the path of practice, no one knows themselves better than they know themselves. So use your strength and try to practice. The ancient said, cook the rice and pick the fish sauce, means this. If so, then I hope to have some good results. If you are still filled with disturbing afflictions, then you should avoid the mundane conditions and try to recite Buddha's name as the best policy. 3. Third issue, does practicing alone at home make progress? This question is difficult to answer definitively and affirmatively. Because, depending on each person's circumstances and determination to practice, progress is different. However, in my opinion, if we don't practice, that's fine, but if we practice, no matter how big or little, we will make progress. Evaluation of that progress depends on each person's disposition and whether or not they practice the Dharma correctly. If Buddhists practice alone at home, it also has a few inconveniences. Firstly, living together in the family can easily give rise to sorrow, anger, and sadness. Second, there is no one to remind and encourage me to improve when I slack off and make mistakes. Third, while we are reciting the Buddha's name, if other family members lack sympathy, understanding, or agree with us, it can easily cause difficulties in our recitation of the Buddha's name. Because our mind is also susceptible to fluctuations, if we do not skillfully control our afflictions, it is easy to have cracks and dents in family relationships. Those are the disadvantages of practicing at home. Because of the situation at home, there is no way to avoid contact with others. On the contrary, if Buddhists practice together with the masses in an ashram, they will have the benefit of having teachers, companions, encouragement, reminders to each other, and especially having certain periods of study, to follow diligent practice. Because it is a good environment, very convenient for me to practice. Having companions and fellow practitioners makes it easier to encourage me. The ancient said, eat rice with soup, practice with friends, like that. Even if I wanted to relax, I couldn't. Practicing in a group, thanks to the enlightened eyes of the Sangha, helps us advance more. However, if I practice alone at home and master the method of practice, following the Buddha's teachings, and skillfully arrange my schedule and appropriate circumstances, and at the same time make determined efforts, then I think Buddhists can also practice and achieve very good results. In short, practicing alone at home, depending on the circumstances and level of understanding of Buddhist teachings, and applying the Dharma correctly will result in great progress and benefits. On the contrary, I advise Buddhists to go to ashrams to study and live with the masses, then they will be promoted better. 4. Is it wrong to advise others to take refuge?
Question, dear teacher, I heard a video of a teacher who said that we should not advise others to take refuge, so that they themselves can develop the mind to take refuge. Because we advise them but they do not keep the precepts, then we and they are all doomed to hell. If they let them develop their own minds, then they will keep the precepts well. However, I also heard someone else say that if we can advise others to take refuge, we will gain immeasurable merit. So let me ask through these two teachings, which teaching is correct? I would like to ask you to kindly answer me.
Answer, if any teaching is correct, in my opinion, all teachings are correct. Saying it like that, at first it sounds like 3 musts, but if you look closely, it's not like that. Based on the questions raised by Buddhists, I find Master A's advice, let's call it that, very reasonable. Because any action that people do voluntarily, not because of the advice or compulsion of others, will have better results. That's because they are self-aware of their responsibility to act, or make a vow from the bottom of their hearts. And if we advise people, sometimes it's because they respect our feelings, and besides, they haven't thoroughly researched the issue we're advising them about, so it's easy for them to become discouraged and unsatisfied later on. From there, they can make bad things and mistakes and then blame all those mistakes on the person who advises them. That advice itself is counterproductive and harmful to the person giving the advice. We should remember that blaming others is also a serious human disease. When things are good, they automatically enjoy them without saying anything. On the contrary, when they fail, they blame others. Because of that man, that teacher, I am like this. If it weren't for that guy's advice, that teacher, my life wouldn't have been this devastating. That's how life is. That is a very common psychology. Anyone who has had a little experience can see this clearly. Therefore, we see many patriarchs who, throughout their entire life of practice, never advised anyone to take refuge or become a monk. And there are those who never accept disciples, whether lay or ordained. This depends on each person's concept and wishes. Because when we advise others, of course we have to be more or less responsible for them. Because they listened to my advice, they followed it. There are many teachers who meet everyone and advise them to leave the monastic tradition and become their disciples. But when they became monks, we were indifferent and didn't care, worry or teach them. As a teacher, if you lack the responsibility to teach, then how can that disciple become a good and useful person? There are many who accept many disciples without teaching them at all. As long as people look at you and see that you have many, many disciples, it's okay. Everyone's life is their own, so failure, success or failure are up to each person to decide. Due to the lack of care and teaching from the teacher, many disciples became corrupt and ruined their entire lives. That's because they are quick to follow advice and act. In fact they have no awareness of the important issue that will determine their entire life later. Indeed, that is also extremely harmful. If they consciously seek out something, then it is valuable. I only play the role of explaining and analyzing for them to clearly see the pros and cons of the problem, then let them think and decide for themselves. We should not interfere in their decisions. Thus, we will avoid bad consequences later. So through Teacher A's teachings, we see that they are very reasonable. As for Teacher B's advice, let's call it that, we don't see anything wrong. Saying so seems to be a contradiction, as if making the mistake of words are similar. This means that the previous statement contradicts the following statement. But, let's just calm down and consider it. Then we will see its reasonableness and there is nothing contradictory. For example, there are people who specialize in doing evil deeds all their lives, assaulting, robbing, killing, deceiving, cheating, stealing, eating on the heads and necks of others, etc. For these types of people, without the advice of others, their evil deeds will become more and more intense and violent. Society is becoming more and more chaotic and insecure. And so, what will human society look like? Therefore, for mean and evil people who often commit crimes, of course they need the advice of others. If one person is willing to wake up and return to the path of honesty, society will have one less burden. Therefore, advice is very valuable in this case. That is to say those who committed the crime. The advice of others acts as a cure. On the contrary, for those who have not committed a crime, the advice of others is effective in preventing the disease from occurring. Both tips have practical benefits. History has proven a lot that this advice has practical value. As Buddha once advised the guy Vo Now who had killed many people. But after becoming a monk, he became an exemplary monk. Advising a butcher to put down his knife will save many animals. Advise a person to practice good deeds and avoid evil, and there will be one less place in prison. If everyone cultivated themselves and practiced good deeds, there would be no prisons on this earth. Therefore, in terms of only doing evil and doing good, creating a relatively peaceful life for society, the advice of true moralists is very valuable. In short, in my opinion, through the above two explanations, each person stands on each side of an issue to argue. Both have their reasons, and both have the effect of building a good society. 5. Is there any benefit to chanting Buddha's name while the mind is still distracted?
Question: Dear teacher, when I chant sutras, recite the Buddha's name, and bow in repentance, but my mind is still confused and my thoughts are wandering, will I get any benefits? Some people say that this is just waste and has no benefit at all. I am still an ordinary person, my karma is deep and heavy, how can I keep my mind from wandering? If there is no benefit at all, then why do you do these things? I'm very confused, please give me a clear answer.
Answer: Buddhists don't worry, of course there are benefits. But that benefit is not much. Because the cause is not very mature, the result is of course not very good. While we practice diligently, no matter what method we practice, the most taboo thing is to let our mind wander and wander. Because we are still ordinary people, our karma is deep and our habits are heavy, so when we practice, of course we cannot avoid distractions. Cultivators are most afraid of habits and Dharma objects. Habits are habits that we practice every day. These good and bad habits are not just acquired by us in the present life, but have existed for many lives in the past. People with strong habits, when practicing, it is difficult to maintain concentration and mindfulness. Speaking of Dharma dust, it is actually just another name for habits. Because while we encounter contact conditions every day, the six senses come into contact with the six sense objects, all of which are stored in the store of a reskin consciousness. This warehouse has the ability to store good and bad seeds, and preserve not a single seed is lost. The original seeds, existing, or new seeds, newly brought in, are stored very carefully by it. The seeds stored in this warehouse are called Dharma sealing. Consciousness-only studies call it, thank you for your money, thank you for your image. That means the shadows of the six senses fall into our consciousness. When we chant sutras, worship, meditate, recite mantras, recite Buddha's name, etc., those are the times when Dharma objects have the opportunity to arise and disturb our minds. At that time, even though we sit still without contact with the external environment, the scenes due to the contact of sense organs and objects have been experienced, then they appear and become conscious. That is the consciousness, sixth consciousness, that is dependent on the Dharma object. So at that time, our mind becomes restless and restless. In the sutras, these random thoughts are often called false thoughts. There is no one who is new to reciting the Buddha's name and has not yet attained the right concentration. But we should not be afraid of delusion, but only afraid of our lack of timely enlightenment or awakening. If when we start thinking about something, we immediately have enlightenment and mindfulness, then those false thoughts will immediately disappear. It is important that we try to calm our minds to gain mindfulness. If we practice diligently for a long time, false thoughts will not be able to do anything to us. Therefore, for practitioners, maintaining mindfulness is extremely important, when reciting Buddha's name. We must be vigilant like a gatekeeper. Must have bright eyes to identify people coming in and out. The person responsible for guarding the gate, of course, must not be negligent or negligent. You must pay close attention and look carefully at the gate. When we recite sutras, chant mantras, recite Buddha's name, we must also pay attention like that. Must clearly identify the intervening thoughts. Like when reciting Buddha's name, our mind must focus on the Buddha's name. At the same time, the mind must be clear and aware. When a thought arises and starts thinking about something else, we must promptly identify and know clearly what they are thinking. Just gently recognize it, don't suppress or oppress it. Because repression has the nature of violent behavior. We shouldn't behave like that. Because delusion is not our enemy, but it is a phenomenon that is part of our mind. Just as waves are a phenomenon of a particle of water. Because waves arise from water. Therefore, water and waves cannot be seen as opposing enemies. But the water must treat the waves very kindly and gently. When the waves rise, the water knows it very well. Because the waves already have water in them, likewise, being and phenomena cannot be separated or separated. In other words, true mind and false mind are not two opposing categories. There is opposition and there is a dispute over loss. If we are not careful, we will create a battlefield of killing in our minds. However, we should also know that the phenomena of delusional habits, although they are shadows that are not real, we should not neglect and despise them. Because it has great power. If we follow it, allowing it to freely lead us east and west, it will torment us with much suffering. Because it never knows how to stop. All Buddhist teachings have the ability to treat, identify, and transform these delusions, as we said, if we don't practice diligently, that's fine, but if we practice diligently, of course there must be benefits. Even when Buddhists sit still and recite the Buddha's name, Buddhists are also restraining themselves in the three karma. The body sits solemnly, or worships, and the mouth chants sutras, or recites Buddha's name, and the mind, although not yet fully focused, at least thinks of Buddha. So, why dare say there is no benefit? How can one say it's like a field car driving the sands of the East Sea? If you say that doing that is like a waste of money, that's not true. It's just that the benefit is more or less. When we practice, at first we all have disturbances and afflictions that arise continuously and are very strong. If we no longer have these things, then why should we practice to make them more tiring? Because we still have false thoughts and afflictions, we practice to gradually eliminate them. When we first begin practicing spiritual practice, it is like a baby learning step by step, first learning to roll over, learning to crawl, learning to stand, then learning to walk, etc. Of course, when practicing like that, it feels very difficult at first. But thanks to him diligently practicing regularly and making it a habit, he no longer feels much difficulty. Like when he learned to stand, at first he fell up and down many times. But if you persevere in practicing standing for a long time, you will no longer fall. From there, keep progressing, practice walking, jumping, running, etc. Our practice must also be practiced diligently step by step like that. There is no newborn baby who knows how to stand, walk, run, and jump right away. Everyone must make an effort to practice. Our practice is the same. That means we also have to practice steadily step by step. Practice each easy step to the difficult step. And while practicing, of course there are good results. Understanding that, Buddhists no longer have to be confused or afraid that they will not benefit. The important thing about spiritual practice is that we must persevere and patiently overcome all obstacles and difficult challenges. Only then can Buddhists hope to achieve their wishes. We wish Buddhists to always be steadfast, patient, and persistent in their practice. 6. Where is the mind?
Question, dear teacher, while we were discussing about the mind, a friend asked me, you said the mind, but do you know where the mind is? I had to keep my mouth shut, not knowing how to respond. So, please give us a clear answer.
Answer: it is also right for Buddhists to remain silent and not answer. Because that friend's question was wrong. If Buddhists answer, Buddhists are still wrong. For example, someone asks Buddhists where the air is. If asked like that, how can Buddhists answer? Know where the air is and answer. Our mind is like air. It is said that it is because the air has no shape or form anywhere. It pervades everything. So is our mind. But the mind is different from the air in that the air is inanimate, but the mind is sentient, meaning it always has a clear, knowing, because knowledge has no form, it has no fixed place. But, the questioner wants to know where it resides, just as he wants to know where the air resides. But the mind or the air has no place to reside. However, in terms of academic exchange and understanding, we would like to temporarily explain a few things. Actually, that question is wrong. If we ask the question, what is a false mind? And what is the true mind? Asking like that will make it easier for us to discuss with each other. In the Shurangama Sutra, Venerable Ananda asked Buddha 7 times about the place of residence of the mind, all of which were rejected by Buddha. Because Ananda also wanted to know where his mind was. So 7 times he pointed out 7 places: the mind is inside the body, outside the body, the mind is hidden in the eyes, back to the mind in the body. The mind depends on the harmony, the mind is in the middle, finally, he gives the place, non-attachment is the mind. Every time he mentioned each place, everything was refuted by the Buddha. After that, he panicked and was afraid that maybe he didn't have a mind. But if you don't have a mind, how can you practice to become a Buddha? That's a confusing place that's hard to understand. Remember, Ananda is only a representative of sentient beings to ask questions, not ignorant like us. The Shurangama Sutra is a series of sutras, specializing in detailed explanations of the true mind and the deluded mind. If you want to know the true mind, you just need to get rid of all delusion and then the truth will appear. For example, if all the clouds are lifted, bright moonlight appears. Thus, to practice, we do not need to search for the true mind, because having the idea of searching for it is wrong. Mr. Tu Tai Truong Chuyet said, eliminate afflictions, multiply and increase illness, and turn towards the truth like total evil. That is, if you have the idea of eliminating afflictions, it will make you sicker. Because the nature of afflictions is inherently empty. If not, then what should be eliminated? The very idea that arises and wants to be eliminated is the disease. If you also have the idea of searching for true reality, that is also evil. Why? Because awareness is not an object to seek. As soon as the idea arises, it is already contrary to the nature of awareness, thus, the true mind is a pure, clear, eternal entity. Because it inherently has no form, like space, it is neither born nor destroyed. An entity that covers the entire Dharma realm like that, how can there be a place to seek it? However, when the false mind arises, it has a shadow and form. That's because it depends on the six sense objects to create shadows, and then we mistakenly accept those shadows as our own true mind. As for the true mind that is quiet, empty, pure and eternal, we forget it. Therefore, the Buddha often scolds us for being ignorant and dark. We mistakenly accept the false mind that arises every moment, and then think it is our mind. Because of such delusion, we follow it and create the karma of reincarnation and suffering. To be more specific, it is the same seeing and knowing, but it has two aspects, just like a coin has two sides. Let's say the knowing depends on the scene of distinguishing between love and hate, right and wrong, good and bad, or bad, etc., then that is false knowledge. As for the knowledge that does not follow false distinctions, but is still constantly shining, that is called true knowledge, that is, non-discriminatory. The Shurangama Sutra has a passage where the Buddha taught Venerable Ananda, if you are not separated from the world, you will distinguish your nature, that is, the true mind. That is, if you leave the present situation, and this, discriminating thought, still remains, then it is your true mind. In the sutras it is often called true mind or true suchness. Even though you know it, there is no shadow of form, the self is so clear and quiet. This knowledge is different from false knowledge in that it distinguishes and does not distinguish. However, we should note, it is not two separate entities. Saying one is wrong, saying two is not right. Like waves and water are inseparable. But when waves arise, we cannot say that the waves are water. But when the waves calm down, the entire nature of water is revealed. Likewise, when knowledge arises to differentiate the conditions of the scene, it is a false phenomenon, let's call it false mind. This knowing is like the phenomenon of waves. When this knowing quiets down, the non-discriminating knowing, in short, emptiness, is completely revealed. Just as the waves disappear, the water appears, the clouds disappear and the moon appears. Therefore, in the sutras it is often said, defilement is bodhi. Or birth and death is nirvana, is exactly this idea. An entity without form, without birth, without death, without stains, without purity, etc. means that beyond such dualistic treatment, there is no place to ask where the mind is. 7. The meaning of the two words Shurangama and the reason why Buddha said the Shurangama mantra.
Question: every early morning, I often recite the Shurangama mantra, but I don't understand what the meaning of Shurangama is. And what is the reason why Buddha said that mantra? Please explain to me clearly.
Answer: Shurangama, in Sanskrit is Surangama, the complete word is Surangama, Chinese translation is great concentration. That means the true nature of all sentient beings and Buddhas. Because its body is vast and has no limits, it covers the entire Dharma realm, so it is called great. This mind-body has always been pure, without contamination or chaos, always quiet, unshakable, and therefore called concentration. Because its nature does not change, permeates past and present, is always immovable, does not increase in holy places, does not decrease in mortal places, is eternal and indestructible, it is called solid. Roughly, that is the meaning of the 3 words, Thursday Shurangama. Which means, great concentration. The reason Buddha said the Shurangama mantra was because the Venerable Ananda was in trouble with the old demon lamp. Venerable Anan was forced into love by the old Ma Dang using the magic spell of the Brahma Pa. At that time, Venerable Ananda was very sad and respectfully turned to the Buddha, hoping that the Buddha would pay attention and have mercy. Rescue him. The Buddha knew that Ananda was in trouble, so after receiving food, the Buddha did not preach the Dharma as usual, but returned immediately to the monastery and then sat cross-legged, with a halo of light on his crown, a 1,000-petaled lotus, on the lotus. There was the Buddha who sat cross-legged and spoke the Shurangama mantra. Buddha told Manjushri to bring that mantra to the old Ma Dang to break the evil spell and save Ananda. Ananda was promptly rescued and then the Buddha allowed the old Ma Dang to practice and become an arhat. That is the reason why there are 5 Shurangama mantras, which monks and nuns as well as Buddhists often recite every late night. 8. Can I chant the Shurangama mantra at home?
Question. Usually in temples, monks and nuns often recite the Shurangama mantra and the 10 mantras of great compassion late at night. So I would like to ask if we, lay people, can recite it?
Answer. Of course. We're just afraid we'll be lazy and not recite it. Chanting sutras and mantras is a very good thing. As mentioned, the reason for the Shurangama mantra is because Ananda was caught in the tribulation of the old demon, so the Buddha's incarnation spoke the mantra, and Bodhisattva Manjushri took on the mission of reciting the mantra to relieve Venerable Ananda. For that reason, in the Zen sects of the Northern Buddhist sect, also known as Developmental Buddhism, Mahayana, they recite this mantra every night. Why not recite at other times but at night? In Zen, there are 2 basic sessions, called 2 sessions of recitation. At night is the Pure Land time, which is reciting the Amitabha Sutra. Late at night, recite the 5 Shurangama mantras and the 10 great compassion mantras. Because at night the air is cool and fresh and the scenery is quiet. The spirit of a person who has just woken up is also more alert and stronger. The mantra has very strong power, so it is very suitable for the concentration of this time. Therefore, the person chanting the mantra, in addition to being self-reliant, also has the strong blessing of the dragon god protecting the Dharma. Thus, regardless of whether Buddhists are monks or lay people, everyone can recite it all. Buddhists don't have to worry about anything. The important thing is that when reciting the mantra, we need to concentrate carefully. Like that, it is very easy to overcome delusions and afflictions. If there are no afflictions or delusions, then at that moment our mind will be calm, peaceful, and gentle. That means we have received great happiness and blessings. 9. What is the correct way for Buddhists to go to temple?
Question. When a Buddhist takes refuge and regularly participates in one temple, but then goes to merit and attends a retreat at another temple, is that a mistake in leaving his temple?
Answer. This is a concept that is heavily prejudiced and very selfish and narrow. I think we Buddhists should avoid it. This phenomenon often occurs among us Buddhists. That is not a very good concept for practice. Buddhists must have an open and tolerant heart. You should not think that only the temple you take refuge in and regularly practice at is your temple. As for other temples, they are not our temples. It is this narrow and selfish concept that gives rise to the evils of conflict, superiority and defeat with each other. This is a huge mistake, which almost the vast majority of us Buddhists make. Buddhists should not be so conservative and stubborn. Admittedly, the temple where I took refuge and received my precepts was the place that nurtured my spiritual life. Of course, we have a duty to contribute to its construction, maintenance and development. Usually, people call it the pagoda or tudin. However, that doesn't mean we don't have the right to visit, study or make contributions to other temples. Suppose our temple, temporarily called that, but actually in this world, there is nothing that is truly us or ours, does not have a study organization, even if it did, it still wouldn't respond properly according to your study needs. Meanwhile, other temples have opened serious study courses. The organization of study there is very thoughtful, dignified and of high quality. In my opinion, it is very suitable for my needs to advance my studies, which I have always wanted for a long time. But because I don't have enough opportunities to study, if you are a Buddhist at heart, you also want to attend, but you are still shy and hesitant, not knowing if you are doing something wrong with your teacher and temple. Because I'm afraid people will think I'm not loyal to my teacher or my temple. Because of thinking like that, Buddhists hesitated to go. If Buddhists have such thoughts, it is a great loss for Buddhists. So let's ask, on the path of practice, how can Buddhists progress? I think, there is no master who has such a narrow-minded and selfish mind. Buddhists should remember that, when Buddhists take refuge in the three jewels, the teacher who transmits the precepts to the Buddhists is only the general representative of the Sangha of the 10 directions, transmitting the precepts to the Buddhists. Thus, Buddhists not only respect and learn from the teacher they take refuge in, but also respect and learn from all other monks and nuns. That is what it means to be a Buddhist. The same goes for going to temple. The temple where I take refuge and receive Dharma precepts, even though it is my original temple, does not mean that I cannot study or practice at other temples. Because the temple is common to all, not reserved for anyone. If anyone still sees private property, then he is not a Buddhist practitioner. Because we still cling to ego and the Dharma too heavily. So, how is it compatible with the principles of enlightenment and liberation? Taking advantage of Buddhists' questions, I would also like to sincerely add some opinions about Buddhists going to temples. I think that Buddhists who go to temples should have a very clear concept. The purpose of Buddhists going to the temple is not only to do meritorious deeds, but also to try to listen to sermons and learn about Buddha's teachings. Only if Buddhists diligently try to regularly learn and listen to the Dharma will they develop their wisdom and know the correct way to practice according to the Buddha's teachings. Since then, Buddhists have applied the Buddha's teachings to practical daily life. Only then will there be practical benefits for oneself, one's family and society. By learning the Dharma, only then will Buddhists be able to contemplate, distinguish, and clearly recognize right and wrong, right and wrong. And so, Buddhists will not be misled and fall into evil paths. However, contributing to Buddhist temples is a good thing to do. Because everyone wants to have more blessings for themselves. However, that is not the main and important thing that Buddhists have to invest all their effort into. Because if a Buddhist has a true heart for merit, he or she will only receive the blessings of suffering. This blessing has a limit, it can only be enjoyed for a certain period of time and then it ends. Therefore, Buddha taught Buddhists to practice both, solemn phuk tri. You must cultivate blessings and wisdom. Only when blessings and wisdom are perfect can you become a Buddha. Furthermore, Buddhists should remember that the temple is a common property, anyone can help. People often say, if you have an ant, the market will be crowded. But if you don't have an ant, there will be no market at all. If it weren't for me, someone else would still be doing it. Sometimes we have done a certain job to help the temple for a long time, and then rely on ourselves to have a lot of merit, which gives rise to high dedication, pride, and contempt for others. Because I think that I am the one who has contributed the most to the temple, there is no one better than me. Some people even despise and dominate the monks and nuns in the temple. People call those people suffering from a very serious gong-then disease. Going to the temple with that attitude will not only cause you to have no blessings, but will also cause more sins. Wonder what's the cause of that error? Because I lack learning and understanding the Dharma. Not only do we refuse to learn or listen to the Dharma, but on the contrary, we also develop a sense of pride and contempt for others. Such a person is truly pitiful and pitiful. Let's think, if people come to the temple, only knowing one thing is to do meritorious service to help the temple, not learning the Dharma and practicing anything, like that, then we don't know where Buddhism will go in the future. And so, Buddhism is left with only the body of the temples, and the soul is absent. Creating a pagoda like that is such a waste of effort. Creating a pagoda scene, with the purpose of giving Buddhists a place to worship, practice and study. New practice is the most important part. All other parts are dependent. That's not to say, when doing meritorious deeds, some people still feel angry, jealous of this person, and criticize and blame that person. That means you can't see blessings, you can only see troubles. This is an unavoidable truth. Just look at reality and their actions, we will see that very clearly. From discord, jealousy, and envy, they then formed groups to defame and attack each other. Whichever faction is strong and has a loud mouth will prevail. So, unknowingly, Buddhists turn the sacred, pure, blue house into a place of controversy and fighting with each other. Buddha from above saw this scene and felt extremely sorry for him. But I don't know how to console my deluded disciples. Thinking about it, it's so heartbreaking. In short, whether to study or do meritorious service to help the temple is each person's right to decide. Buddhists don't just have to study or do meritorious deeds at the temple they take refuge in, but Buddhists can also study or do meritorious deeds at any other temple if they want. However, according to Buddha's teachings, Buddhists need to have clear wisdom to distinguish and carefully consider the benefits and harms of their actions. We must clearly consider the places where we go to practice and study, or whether the results are consistent with the Dharma taught by Buddha or not. If we consider that any place has practical benefits for our practice, then we have the right to go there to practice. No one has the right to stop me. Going to study and practice is a good thing, worthy of encouragement and praise, but absolutely, Buddhists should not criticize or speak ill of this or that temple. That is a taboo for Buddhists. Because like that, you will only incur more guilt for your verbal karma. We wish Buddhists to have enough wisdom and insight to make correct judgments in their practice. Only then can Buddhists hope to achieve good results. 10. Is it a sin to take the Bodhisattva precepts at home to keep dogs and cats?
Question: I have taken the Bodhisattva precepts at home, but my children and grandchildren's families love to keep cats and dogs at home. So I ask, are you guilty?
Answer: Buddhists can rest assured that there is nothing sinful. Due to circumstances, Buddhists still have to live in the same family with their children and grandchildren, so raising cats and dogs is the children's business and has nothing to do with Buddhists. It's not like Buddhists want to feed but are afraid of sin. Furthermore, for lay Buddhists who only follow the 5 precepts, the Buddha does not prohibit raising animals. Buddha's only prohibition is not to kill living creatures. This is not only Buddhists who raise cats and dogs, but even in temples, occasionally, we see temples where monks and nuns also keep dogs. Buddhists have received the Bodhisattva precepts at home. In the 15th precept, the Buddha forbids Buddhists to keep ferret cats. If they do, they commit an unintentional crime. And in the 16th precept, Buddha forbids raising livestock such as elephants, horses, buffaloes, goats, camels, and donkeys. If one raises and does not perform almsgiving for those who have not yet received precepts, Buddhists will commit the crime of inattention. This is a contemptible precept, so if you commit it, you must wholeheartedly repent. If you do not repent, you will fall into hell and pollute the world. Why did Buddha forbid it like that? Because this is the cause of sin. People who receive the Bodhisattva precepts must have compassion and should not raise them to force them to serve and suffer for themselves. Furthermore, these species are raised only to be sold for human consumption. Even if you don't kill it yourself, because killing it yourself would be a serious crime, so you should sell it to someone else to kill for money. If someone catches these animals for meat, then we buy them back and raise them to release them, then it's okay. Why did Buddha forbid keeping ferret cats? Because these 2 animals specialize in catching mice, or killing one or the other. If you raise it, it often kills and hurts other species. Therefore, Buddha forbids raising these animals. If you have received the Bodhisattva precepts and still keep them, you commit a sin. Even if you raise a dog, you have to be careful. According to the law, if we raise hunting dogs, we commit a crime, but if we raise dogs to guard the house, we do not commit a crime. In the case of Buddhists, it has nothing to do with raising dogs and cats. Therefore, Buddhists can rest assured that there is nothing to blame.
Thank you for spending your valuable time on my channel journey to enlightenment. Wishing you a very peaceful and happy day. Don't forget to click like and subscribe to my support channel. See you in the next video.